I remember having conversations with people I'd have to dribble out the project over weeks and weeks because there were limits on how many pieces you could have mint per week, say on Super Rare. So it took me a while to get 40 artworks out into the public. And I remember having conversations like, man, wouldn't it be great? It just makes sense that you could you could easily just figure out a way to and I didn't know the technical steps to do this, but it just makes sense to me that you could just put this algorithm like online and just let people create the outputs on the fly, you know what I mean? And just buy them that way, like a vending machine.
Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Lysing, and this is my show, Decent People. Welcome back to the conversation. Today, I'm really excited. I've got an amazing guest and someone I've admired for quite a while. It's Jeff Davis. He is the Chief Creative Officer at Artblocks and one of the more celebrated NFT artists working right now. I have met Jeff a few times, mostly through events hosted by Bright Moments, which is the in real life gallery that's on its world tour right now and will be stopping in Tokyo in a few months for its latest show where they mint NFTs in real time when you're there at the gallery. So it's a mix of in real life and digital. I talked to Jeff today about growing up outside of Chicago and becoming an art professor for 20 years and about some of his love of math and how that sort of informs a lot of his art. And we talked about, of course, Bright Moments and what they're doing and how Jeff has formed quite a tight partnership with those guys like Seth Goldstein and the whole Bright Moments crew. With all that out of the way, let's get to the conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. It's an honor to have you on. I'm a big fan of all your work and what you are doing for the NFT generative art space. This is a conversation I've really been looking forward to. So I think the last time I saw you was in Los Angeles at Bright Moments. And since then, I believe you went to Tokyo to do the latest installment of what they're doing in their world tour.
Yeah, I haven't gone, that hasn't happened yet. So that'll be early May. But yeah, I've been working on my project. I'm going to be participating there as an artist again, as I have in all the Bright Moments locations. So yeah, I'm getting my project ready, getting my travel booked, and I based kind of my work in progress during the Bright Moments event in LA, kind of the project
Oh,
I'm
okay.
working on for that.
Yeah, I must have got that mixed up. I thought you had already gone there, but I think that they're on sale and I believe they've sold out.
Yeah, so the mint passes went on sale, a few weeks ago at this point. Yeah, and so the way that Bright Moments does it is there are 11 artists in total participating in the Tokyo collection for generative art, and they sell them blindly. So you just get a mint pass and you actually don't know which artist or project it's assigned to. And then there's a reveal, which just happened recently, that essentially attaches the artists to the mint passes. So yeah, that all just wrapped up. And it's nice actually like participating that way, because what happens is all the kind of economics and sales part of the projects gets out of the way beforehand. And then so when we actually show up on site and in the city to do the minting and experience the events, all the financial portion of that is out of the way, and we can just focus on the art experience then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about the art and revealing. People don't know what it's going to look like. The artist doesn't know. It's, fascinating. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I'd love to talk to you about your background and where you came from and how this all came about. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, Crystal Lake, Illinois. Lived there just my entire childhood. That's where I was raised and grew up. It's sort of a normal suburban life. Trips into downtown Chicago, which is some of my first art exposure. I was doing that.
Yeah, it's a great art city and architecture city as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What were your parents doing at that point?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was an actuary. They had both studied mathematics at Lawrence University, which is where I ultimately ended up going to college. And I also studied mathematics as an undergraduate as well. Yeah, it was funny, a little bit of a legacy there, both in terms of school and subject.
Yeah, I noticed. I thought this encapsulated you really in just a few words. Your major there was a bachelor's in math and studio art.
Yes.
I don't
Yeah,
think I've
well, I
ever
mean,
seen that.
Yeah, I definitely started when I went to college. I was always good at math. It was a subject I liked in high school. Um, and that's what I thought I would be studying when I went to college. And I initially was toying with adding a physics major with it. They seemed very related subjects. And I took some physics courses and I actually didn't like them as much as I thought I would. So then I just said, I'll just stick with the math part. But where I went to school, Lawrence University, it's a liberal arts college. And so you have to take a lot of different disciplines as a requirement for fulfilling the liberal arts portion of your degree, regardless of what you major in. And I guess the beginning of my sophomore year, I took a studio art class, intro to studio art, just to fulfill one of my liberal arts requirements, humanities type requirements. And I really liked it. It was the first time I actually really did art way. I think I probably always thought of myself as being a creative person, but not really in terms of like anything specific or an art form or a hobby or a design or anything like that. And my mom actually was pretty creative too. She did a lot of like craft oriented things, quilting and things of that nature. And so I think it was there and I just didn't really realize it. And then I took this studio art class and I was like, this is great. I want to try some more of this. And so the next semester I took an intro to painting class and then followed that with an intro to printmaking class. And then by the end of my sophomore year, I was looking at my schedule and figuring out how to add a studio art degree on top of the math degree I
Yeah.
was pursuing.
But as a kid, did you like to draw or did you have an artistic inkling? Like you said, your mom was creative, but did you
Yeah, I
excel at
think so a
all?
little bit.
Or
I liked, I don't know if not drawing so much. I really liked coloring. I remember as a child having this memory of these coloring books that we had, but they were really like, they were more like adult coloring books. I don't mean that in terms of content, but just in terms of like complexity, like really complicated, like
yeah, I know
almost
exactly what you're
fractal
talking about.
patterns and things like that. And I would get these
Yeah,
massive marker sets and I would spend
right.
just
Like
hours and
it's a
hours.
cathedral or something that
Exactly,
you're,
exactly. And
yeah,
like coloring those sorts of things. And that was really, I loved doing that. Also, my dad was really interested in early personal computing and introducing me to that. And so I had some really early computers early on that I also like to tinker with. And so that always felt like a creative
yeah.
outlet to me too, just hacking away at an Apple IIe
Were
or
you building your own computer? Like you could,
oh, he would find
no,
ones that were off the shelf. One of the first ones we had this weird like you plug it into a black and white TV and it had a membrane keyboard and then you would attach a cassette recorder to it and you could
wow,
record it served as basically the disk drive. So you could program on it and then record a bunch of bleeps and bloops
yeah.
into a tape deck, which you could then play back into the machine to like load the program. And that was an early one. And then I had an Apple IIe when that came out, and that was next level
Uh,
computing.
it
And
reminds
so,
me
yeah.
of Pong. Did you ever have Pong?
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Actually, that first computer that I was telling you about, that was probably one of the first things I learned how to program. You'd get like magazines and things like that that would have like code
Uh-huh.
base in them. And so I think that was one of the first things I programmed on that other
Yeah,
computer.
that's great. Yeah, I remember programming like if then games where you
Yeah.
would have choose your own adventure basically, but on the prompt line of the computer.
But yeah, so I think I was involved in a lot of things. I really like skateboarding and like the culture and kind of the graphics culture around that. And so there just was a lot of things that I think both felt creative to me, probably influenced me creatively. I just didn't really have an organization to it,
Yeah.
or I
It's
didn't
hard as a kid, right?
explicitly,
How do you
yeah,
know
you didn't
what
explicitly
yeah.
say, oh,
No.
I'm creative or I like drawing or I'm an
Yeah.
artist or whatever. And it wasn't until like I took some formal sort of training on it that it would just really open my eyes to like things I
And
probably had been thinking about. Yeah, but
yeah.
just didn't really understand
Yeah.
what I was thinking
Kind of
about.
under the surface. Were you when you were good at math and things like that, did you have a plan in mind there? Was it engineering that you thought you might want to go to, architecture or
Yeah, I didn't know. I just knew that math was a good path for me and I still do. I enjoy doing math problems. I think probably when I was in college, my thinking was I really like college. And so maybe I just want to stay in college. And so I will pursue math and go on and get my master's, my PhD, and then I'll come back and I'll teach.
I
I'll
was
teach at
yeah,
college.
I
And so
was the
that was
same.
probably how I was. And
Yeah.
ultimately I ended up following that road, but for art instead. That was my initial um, interest in majoring in art, and then I went straight to grad school to get my MFA, which is the terminal degree for being a studio artist. And then the plan was to return back to college to be a art professor.
So when art grabbed you as an undergrad, what medium were you working in, and what was it that you loved about it that made you make this shift in your life?
Yeah, I just started with painting. It just seemed like the lowest hanging fruit, to just something to get your hands on and make. The I very quickly adopted a hard edge geometric style to my work, and which isn't surprising given sort of my background in math. I just went into geometry and abstraction pretty quickly. And yeah, paint was just readily available, and you could make a surface and start painting on it. But I never, I don't know, how would I say, I never really enjoyed the act of painting. It was always a production process for me, like a factory process. I would, before I would start a painting, I would know exactly what I want the thing to look like. Like I'd have already sketched it out and figured out the colors and the structure of it. And so painting was just a building process of what that thing was. There was no discovery that happened through
It
the
was like a
course of
means to an
painting.
end,
Yeah,
kind of.
exactly. It was just a production. And because the work I was doing was very straight and precise, and I did as best as I could with paint to achieve that, but I never was quite happy with the level of precision that I could achieve in painting. And yeah, I started experimenting with other things, printmaking. In college I was doing lithography and woodblock
Mhm.
prints and things of that nature, etching. And then when I got to grad school, I started exploring silk screening, and that was probably, out of all the, I guess, fine art mediums that I experimented with, that one felt the most precise and was able to get the most precision out of that, out of anything else.
Oh, do you think you get that precision, that desire for precision from your math background? Because obviously math is a precise science, right? It's either right or it's wrong.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And it's just, I don't know, I started just developing approach to um, what I wanted to do artistically. And it's not that it was like straight up like math, but I was doing a lot of representational abstraction. So I would look at my surroundings around me, particularly architecture, and I try to sort out what the most basic underlying structure was in the things that I was looking at, and imbuing them with symmetry and proportion. And so in doing that, it just got to a point where if I wanted things to be proportionally equal to each other, 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. And so it to be able to express that properly, those numbers needed to be right, or the edges of things needed to be straight. And yeah, I think the art that I was engaged in early on was about ordering my surroundings. And yeah, I think that's where the desire for precision came from as well.
And were there artists that you were admiring at that point that sort of were had done this sort of thing before, or did you feel like this was something that you just needed to get out?
Yeah, no, definitely lots of influences. I was initially really influenced by pop art and just like bold colors and flat colors, graphic lines, outlining things. And then minimalism was a big influence on me as well. Just this idea that a work of art could be stripped down to its just bare minimum elements, and you're just exposing that. And that was just really appealing to me. So, just in a general sense, yeah, those sorts of things. And then more specific one is Joseph Albers is just a huge influence on me, and that kind of came more to me during grad school, studying color theory there, and it was based on his book Interaction of Color. But just also just because I was approaching art, say through my graduate studies, with the intentions of returning to education and teaching art, and Albers was a had a similar arc. His career was a practicing artist, but also it was very important to him to be an educator. And so there was kind of element to his work that that I drew from, that it can be, you can, the work itself can be visually beautiful, but it can also be like explanatory about what it is or what it's trying to convey. Like it can be educational in a sense as well.
Yeah. And then what was it like after grad school? I know a lot of MFA. I don't know a lot about this, but I do get the impression that it can be hard to find a teaching position.
Yeah.
How was that in the art world? Is it the same way, or what's that like?
Yeah, no, it's very competitive. So immediately after, during grad school, and this kind of goes back to the fact that I was generally interested in computers, just not for artistic use, but just I was just interested in technology. While I was in grad school, I taught myself the basics of, it wasn't called Adobe Creative Suite, but the Adobe suite of products. So I taught myself Photoshop and Illustrator. I taught myself to do, the internet was just coming of age. And so I taught myself how to make basic web pages, um, thinking that could be a fallback position. If I need a job, if I knew how to use this software, then I could maybe do some design work or something like that. And so immediately out of grad school, that's what I did. I stayed in Chicago and I was a consultant, and I basically went into design firms and I helped designers learn how to use, it was weird. It was like I was teaching software, but inside of design firms. So I would go in and help their designers learn how to use Illustrator or learn how to use Photoshop, the basic functionalities. That was interesting. And then basically my path towards trying to enter the education space is why I currently live in the Phoenix area now. I moved out here in, geez, 97, 98 for a teaching job that I was offered here. And it was at a charter high school. And they primarily wanted me to teach math, but they did have an art class. And so I had the ability to additionally teach some art class as well. Um, and so the idea was I'd move out here, get a few years of experience under my belt, and then maybe move back to the Chicago area or
Mm.
to a campus somewhere where I would take that next step. And I actually never ended up leaving. I started doing some evening courses at the Art Institute of Phoenix, which was a campus of a larger network of design schools. I was teaching Photoshop and some color theory in the evenings there. And then they eventually decided to pilot an online university. And just, this was like 1999, 2000, and it was pretty cutting edge at the time to think about offering just online education, period, but thinking about offering something visual like art and design. And I helped build some of the first classes for the school, taught them, and then basically that became my full-time job in 2000. And I stayed with the Art Institute online for 20 years after that,
Yeah,
teaching.
that's the University of Phoenix, right? That you see everywhere now.
It's actually not. So the University of Phoenix is, yeah, another big online university here. So this was similar. They were probably just getting started in that same time zone as well. But yeah,
Oh,
so this was the Art Institutes. They're headquartered actually in Pittsburgh, and they don't really, they might have a few campuses left, but at the height of their growth, they had campuses in pretty much every major metropolitan city in the US, if not multiple. And it was geared towards teaching applied arts. So you would get a degree in graphic design or web design or fashion design, that sort of thing. And I taught in the foundations department. So they had a first year program that, regardless of your ending point of study, there's a common curriculum that everybody took. And so it was your basic intro to art classes. So I taught design fundamentals, color theory, we taught drawing, things of that nature, intro to Illustrator, intro to Photoshop,
sure.
intro to design
Yeah.
applications.
And I just learned this recently, that digital art goes back, I think, to the 70s. Had you stumbled across any of that on your journey up to this point?
Yeah, so yeah, it goes back to probably 50 advent of the first computers, like in the late 50s. But no, I was not aware that history necessarily existed. And my degree at the Art Institute of Chicago was in painting and drawing, and I took normal art history classes as part of that degree. And so my framing of like art history was through that lens, understanding art through your more traditional survey of Western art from whenever to modern day. But yeah, in that kind of the computer art movement that I'm more familiar with now, yeah, it wasn't really part of that.
Yeah, it doesn't really get
That discourse,
mentioned,
right?
does it, in the pantheon?
Right.
Um, yeah. Um, and then I was really interested to see that you have written two textbooks on art. And How did that come about?
Yeah, it was just kind of part and parcel with my passion through kind of higher education. Yeah, after I was teaching, like I said, design fundamentals, color theory for many years. I just got to a point where I decided to write textbooks that I would, if I was going to make a textbook for the classes that I was teaching, this is the
Hmm.
content I wanted to put together. And yeah, so initially wrote Foundations of Design. Actually, during kind of, I've, on a few different occasions, I've gone on artist residencies at different places. And I did an artist residency at Vermont Studio Center for a month, somewhere along the line. And I did a different month at the Wurlitzer Foundation in Taos, Mexico. And in each of those residencies, I basically took a month long sabbatical to do each of those. And they were geared towards having dedicated time to create art and just explore your art.
Yeah.
But I would do that during the day. And then after dinner, I would spend my evenings writing, working on these textbooks. And the first one I wrote was Foundations of Design. It was initially picked up by Cengage Publishing, which is a academic publishing company. And I ended up not being super happy with what they were doing with the book in terms of marketing and sales. And I knew I had another one kind of queued up that I wanted to do, which was Foundations of Color, which is the follow on to Foundations of Design. I ended up writing that one and self publishing it and just building my own
Mm.
sort of publishing arm to support that book. And then eventually was able to get the rights to Foundations of Design back and self publish that one as well. And
Okay.
yeah, so I have both those two books and they're still utilized in curriculum across the US, and
Yeah,
it's
that's
fun.
great. Yeah, you don't have to tell me about my publisher, who will go unnamed, did absolutely nothing to market or promote my book. So I hear you on that
Yeah,
front, and
and
it's a
it
very
was
thing.
nothing against them. It was a weird timing issue. Like the book came out during a restructuring period for the company, and it just got lost in the shuffle. But yeah, that was a fun process, and it was just really art and writing those books and teaching, and it was all just kind of part of what my career was. Right, the writing fed into the fact that I was stemmed from my teaching and fed back into my teaching, and my art making was kind of in support of my teaching as well. And so it's just all bundled together into a
Yeah, yeah. And then I find it really interesting how the lack of precision was what drove you more and more towards digital art.
yeah.
When did that really start to pick up for you in this journey of when you're an art professor and writing textbooks and things like
Yeah.
that?
It came from the fact that I learned some of these design tools when I was in grad school. And I was actually, for many years, I would use them. Like I'd use Adobe Illustrator, but I'd use it like a sketchbook. So I mentioned this before, I would map out exactly what my composition and color system would look like for a work of art. And then I'd be like, okay, that's the thing. I need to make it. And then I would take that plan essentially and I would execute it in Paint or create a silk screen or whatever the situation was. And part of that was that I didn't really think of what I was doing digitally as like a work of art. It was a preparatory thing that I was doing. And I thought maybe I could figure out how to print these like digital prints. But when I was engaged in that kind of work, the quality of printing didn't feel like it was worthy of being a work of art. I didn't feel like the output that I would have been able to achieve with the existing printing technology at that time was strong enough. It felt secondary to like making a painting or doing something else, doing a more traditional print.
And
Um,
is this like when computer monitors were like CRT still, or was it still like
for
that
sure.
era?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
so
that's not great either,
there was
right?
inkjet prints. Sure. You could see the resolution and paper quality. I don't know. It wasn't great. And I just wasn't comfortable like using that as the expression of what I was trying to do. But eventually that caught up. And so I think probably, yeah, 99, 2000, I started realizing that there was printing technology that was like more compelling and that I could use. And so at that point, I was still working in the same way where I was like hand drawing architectural abstraction of my drawings or of my surroundings, and I was doing it digitally. But then I was like, I'm going to just print these from my Illustrator files or Photoshop files. And then that's how I started working for many years, for probably about 10 years. Digital creation, digital production, not generative yet at that point. I was just still, they were all decisions that I was making myself and based on my visual surroundings. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I was probably for about 10 years, just consider myself a digital printmaker. And I do often, just the way that I worked anyway, is I would work in series very often. I develop a structure to explore and then create similar variants inside of that structure. And so I would work in sets of 3 or 5 or 8 or 10. And so, again, that's truly generative, but I was starting to ease into that direction, so over a period of time. And working digitally helped me do more of that because I could work more quickly or explore ideas more thoroughly or more deeply.
Yeah. It's almost like
When
it's not a template, but you have the,
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a good way to think about it. It wasn't like a hard template, but I would come up with an idea and I'd be like, okay, but I could also explore variants inside the same concept and keep a lot of the same framework and create a series of 8 pieces instead of a singular piece. And if I didn't have to take the time to build and paint them all each individually, then I was a little bit more agile. And so
yeah,
I started working.
efficient.
Yeah, yeah. So I was able to work a little bit more, think about depth a little bit more in my work. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think growing up outside of Chicago and then your time at the Art Institute of Chicago, because when I look at a lot of your work, you said it's geometric, but it also seems very architectural to
Oh,
me.
for sure.
Do you think that influenced you? And Chicago is a great skyscraper city, and I see a lot of that in your work. Was that conscious, or where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, yeah, both conscious and unconscious. It absolutely just the geometry of the city, or just really, I think, got into my mind as something that, that I could draw inspiration from. And so for sure. Yeah, I knew that what I was doing during that period of my artistic career, I was very explicit about it. I was essentially looking at the architecture. And when I say architecture, I don't necessarily mean it can be very mundane things like a door frame and a wall. It didn't have to be something that was like this compelling architectural
Yeah, or
specimen. But just
glass
literally
windows in a
the fact that,
skyscraper.
yeah, that you're just surrounded by lines and rectangles and squares and right angles, like that just was ample fodder for me to create geometric abstractions based off of.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And then let's fast forward a little bit. When did you get into or how were you exposed first to maybe blockchain in general or crypto? And then can you just lay out how you were first, I believe you were approached by Art Blocks to do some work for them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I can back up just a little bit before that. So, probably around 2010 or so, I started wanting to introduce randomness into the work that I was doing. And I initially started tinkering with things like spreadsheets and other ways to just create random decisions or random tables of data. And then I would use that information to then guide, say, the construction of a composition or color choices that I would make. And that was really intriguing to me. It was just a new direction for my work. And then I realized this is really tedious to do this. There must be a way to like automate, have these decisions be made, but also have the drawings happen simultaneously with the decision making process, the kind of the randomized decision making process. And so that's when I started learning processing. And that was my foray into generative art. I taught myself processing and some
And
basic.
is by processing, do you mean you're actually writing code now?
Yes, yeah, sorry. Processing was kind of one of the first programming languages. It's based on JavaScript, but it was geared towards artists and visual output. And I just, from some research, just discovered it and just started teaching it myself to how to program in it.
Okay.
I had never really done programming before, but again, I think my math background coming into play, the logic of it made sense to me. And so that started my career in generative art. And so that's how I've been pursuing my art now for the last, whatever, 13,
Yeah.
13 years since then. But in terms of, yeah, blockchain, in 2019, I started exploring NFTs. I really didn't have any background in crypto. Probably knew what Bitcoin was just from the news, but no real understanding of what that meant or what a block, just knew, oh, it's cryptocurrency. But at some point in 2019, my recollection is that a platform or two started following me on Twitter. I think Super Rare and maybe Known Origin started following me on Twitter. And I actually didn't really use Twitter all that much. So was I noticed if somebody
Mhm.
followed me, I probably had a notification and I'm like, oh, well, let me go
Mhm.
check that out. And I went in and looked at these platforms and I was trying to figure out how they worked. And ultimately, I was really intrigued by this idea of that the artwork on these sites was digital. You weren't like buying an artwork and then getting a print or something like that. And that there was a market for these things. Like people were buying and selling digital artworks. And given at that point, I'd been doing generative art for 10 years or so and been producing work digitally, but the end point was always a print or something physical that I would create from my algorithms. I was just really interested. It was like, oh, okay, let me just tinker around this and play. And so I bought $20, $40 worth of Ethereum on Coinbase, and that was going to be my minting supply and just see what happened. And so, yeah, so I minted some of my first pieces on Super Rare and sold them for one ETH or something, which was like like $20 or something
Yeah.
at the
Yeah, that
time.
was
And but it was like that
the
didn't
last bear
matter. It
market.
wasn't like, yeah, it wasn't like I was trying to do it to make a bunch of money or I thought this was going to be like lucrative, but it was really cool. So just I put this thing online, someone bought it digitally, and I received zero point 0.1 ETH back, and that can pay for the next thing that I want to do. Yeah, so I was experimenting with that. I was still keeping my normal art practice intact. I was still creating projects that I would turn into prints and exhibit locally and that sort of thing. And just the more I got into NFTs, just the more interesting I thought it was. And so later, it probably, yeah, late 2019, early 2020, I was like, I'm going to try to just like, oh, it's, I guess what I had been doing for the work that I was turning into NFTs is I was taking existing projects that I had been working on already. And then I would just run like essentially additional outputs from those algorithms and then mint those. And
Mhm.
then, so it was just, I wasn't necessarily doing anything new or specific in the NFT space. They were just extensions of other work I was already doing. And
Okay.
so early 2020 or so, I was like, I'm going to just go in. I'm going to go all in and just dive in for a period of time and just really focus on NFTs and try to figure this out. And so I got really active on Twitter and figuring out who's in the space and who to follow, who to talk to. And then I created my first project specifically for just NFT distribution that was different from other things I was working on. It was called the series was called Abstract Tokens, and it was a series of 40 NFTs that I did, and I minted them on a combination of super rare and rareable, and got tried to market myself and be a little bit more active and have more of a voice on Twitter about what I was doing. And it was a pretty successful project. But the nature of what I was, it was a generative project. I wrote algorithms for that work. I'd run the algorithm and then I would hand select outputs, create PNG files, and then that's the things I would mint on Super. So it was a great project and really got me immersed into the culture, as it were, in the community. And then, but I remember having conversations with people while I'd have to dribble out the project over weeks and weeks because you could only, there were limits on how many pieces you could have mint per week, say on Super Rare. So it took me a while to get 40 artworks out into the public. And I remember having conversations like, man, wouldn't it be great? It just makes sense that you could put, you could easily just figure out a way to just, and I didn't know the technical steps to do this, but it just makes sense to me that you could just put this algorithm like online and just let people create the outputs on the fly, you know what I mean? And just buy them that way, like a vending machine. That's how I was describing it. And so later in 2020, I received an email from Eric Calderon, the founder of Artblocks, and he said, I loved your work. I really enjoy it. I think you're doing generative work. I think you'd be a great fit for this platform that I'm working on called Artblocks. And so that was it. It was a cold sort of
Wow.
introduction to the platform and an invitation to join. And I said to him, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome. You're describing this thing that I was also interested in, this art vending machine." And he was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's great. It's like a generative vending machine." So I got my first project together, and I was a little nervous at first because I thought technically I didn't know if I understood enough to like deploy the project. Like I didn't know what like test nets were or um, token hashes or things like
Yeah.
that. But Eric was very gentle and patient with me and stepped me through a lot of that process. And yeah, and then we went live with the first projects on Art Blocks. It was actually Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving 2020. So he had a project, Eric did, his brother, DCA, and myself. And so those three projects, Chromie Squiggles, Genesis, and Construction Token, all went live on opening day for Art Blocks.
Yeah. And since then, Artblocks has grown into this huge, one of the most influential platforms for generative NFT art. I think it's sales. I don't know. Secondary market sales are obviously like through the roof. They're in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I was interested to hear you talk about randomness and you wanting to infuse randomness into your art. Um, on the one hand, you said you liked the efficiency of doing series, right, in a digital format where you could do many different takes on a certain sort of approach in a relatively quick time compared to painting them by hand. Was there something
That's it
else
for this
about
episode.
randomness that appealed
Thanks for
to
joining
you?
us. And don't forget to rate and
Yeah,
follow
I mean,
this
I think,
show on Apple, Spotify, and
think
Amazon Music.
my early work,
Decent People is a
in some
production
sense,
of
was
DeCent
almost
Media.
algorithmic, but they were
It is produced by
probably
Matt
very
Bogart with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem
limited
Imes.
algorithmic spaces. And so there would only be like a handful of decisions that you could make, or you could completely exhaust the system in 8 tries or something like that. And so the randomness part became more appealing to me when you could develop systems that were bigger than you could deal with in terms of iterating over the space of that system yourself, just through your own doing. And so randomness allows you this sense of you can create a highly structured or ordered system, or not, but I do. The way I like to work is create a really highly ordered and structured system, but maybe it's large enough that you to understand what's happening inside of it, you have to introduce randomness, because otherwise you'll just get stuck in some portion of that space. I don't know if that makes sense, but the randomness sort of frees you up to think about the overall system than individual decisions within that system. And then when you pair that with computing and coding, you're able to iterate super, super rapidly inside of that system and start to understand what it looks like, how it feels. And that can then inform your refinement or development of the system, seeing lots of outputs.
So then I don't know how quickly this came about, but you are the chief creative officer at Art Blocks. What does that title entail? What are you looking for new people to bring onto the platform? Are you making decisions about the direction you guys want to go next, or what's that?
Yeah. Essentially, it just means that I have responsibility over the team that works with artists and the art and the projects that come out of Art Blocks. The creative output of Art Blocks is essentially in my domain. Yeah. Essentially, when Eric contacted me and I had went live with my project, I actually at that point had stopped teaching in higher education, and I was doing some entrepreneurial work on my own. I started a print publishing company called Dave's Editions, and I would work with contemporary artists to create digital prints of their artwork. And that's what essentially my day job was when I was doing NFTs at night and got going on Art Blocks. And so after Art Blocks started, just first couple of projects came through, I just approached Eric and said, "Hey, I'd love to help you build this thing. I'm just really intrigued with what you're working on. Here's a skill set essentially that I have from what I've been doing over the last couple of years, which is managing artists, helping them bring projects to online sales, essentially." And I said, I can just pivot out of that, and I could do it here at Artblocks. And I just pitched them and said that this is what I could help, and if it's of interest to you, and that would allow you to focus on the business elements or the tech elements of Artblocks. And yeah, he thought that was a good idea.
Talk
And
about great timing.
Yeah,
and
yeah. And so
that
I was the
was
first, official employee of Art Blocks. And yeah, and so that's just been my role. It's just been working. It's been a dream come true, to be honest,
yeah,
having this front row seat to work with all these amazing generative artists and help them be supported and bring their projects to life. And there's just, I guess it's a thread through a lot of my career, through education and through the
yeah,
entrepreneurial work. I get a lot of satisfaction out of seeing other artists succeed. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Not just focusing on my own artwork. I really get a lot out of helping other artists
yeah.
bring
No,
their
it
work to life as
sounds
well.
like that's definitely in your educational background and desire. But another great collaboration with you has been with Seth Goldstein at Right Moments, where you've participated in several of his shows in Los Angeles and all around the world. How did you meet Seth? And can you talk a little bit about the Bright Moments experience and what it's like to be there with the person who's going to buy your NFT as it's being unveiled before both of your eyes for the first time? That's one of the more amazing things to me about
Yeah.
this space.
Yeah. So my Bright Moments story actually does not start all that differently from my art block story. Seth DM'd me on Twitter and said, "Hey, I like your artwork. I'm starting an NFT gallery in LA. I think you should check it out." And I set up a
There you
call with
go.
him. Yep. And he gave me a video walkthrough of the space and its humble beginnings.
Twitter has been very good to you.
Yes. Yes, it has. But I had been, so this was all of my NFT career has been during pandemic era. And so as I was getting into NFTs and digital art, I wasn't I was no longer having opportunities or pursuing things in the physical world because things weren't open. There wasn't opportunities to
Mhm.
go have a gallery opening. And so increasingly my art practice just became online. And that's where my work was being presented and where it was being talked about and where I was engaging with people. Um, and so Bright Moments came along. It was at the first, people were just starting to get their second vaccines and lockdown was starting to lift a little bit. And so the timing was really good for me too, because I was really interested I really want to get back to this sort of social aspect of in real life social aspect of presenting my work, getting it on the walls, showing it to people, interacting with them in a physical space. And so it didn't, I didn't need too much convincing that I wanted to experiment with doing
Yeah.
that. And so Bright Moments was the first
Yeah. And
kind of place that I
yeah,
found that
definitely
was
coming out of the
going to do that.
pandemic, that human connection of being together with people again in a gallery and everyone enjoying the artwork and stuff was a huge deal, just beyond the fact that Seth and the folks at Bright Moments had the very smart idea of bridging the gap between the real world and the NFT world by making people come in and mint things in person.
Yeah. Yeah. And the minting came a little later. And so, like, my first show was Portals in Venice Beach. And what we did there is I actually created an art blocks project, but we didn't really have a mechanism for like live minting. There wasn't really a way to functionally do it. And so what we did instead is I pre-minted them. It was only a project of 10 outputs, but I pre-minted all 10 and then we sold them on auction in the gallery during the opening. We just listed them on auction on OpenSea
Yeah.
and ran the auctions. And then after that, I think they had other shows like that, but then they decided the next place they wanted to go was New York. And so the period between moving from LA to New York, the Bright Moms team figured out how to approach this idea of IRL minting. So doing the minting actually in the space in real time. That's where they came up with the concept of mint passes that could then be redeemed, burned essentially to do the IRL minting. And I did a project in New York called Reflections. And so that was my first experience with minting directly in a real life setting with the collectors.
Yeah.
Um, and that experience was amazing. I don't even know. It was so special. So we would have 7 or 8 collectors. They would go down into the basement of the building. They would mint their work and not see it. And then they would come back upstairs to where the main gallery was. And there was a monitor for each one of them. And they would stand in front of their monitor. And then ta-da, artwork
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
revealed to them. And then I would walk down the line and I would talk to each individual person because it was new to me too. And so we were experiencing it for the first time together. And I would figure out what features were at play and explain them to the collector and kind of what they help explain what they were seeing. And
Yeah.
then
Amazing.
give them a hug and then go do it the next time. And we did that times 100 minutes over the course of a night. And it was just, yeah, it was a really special
Yeah.
event.
I
And
was
it
at that
really
event.
changed.
I
Yeah.
unfortunately didn't get to see you, but I was there for the Tyler Hobbs night, which
Okay.
was, yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
And
But it really changed, yeah, my approach. And so that was also part of what sort of locked me into the fact that as much as Bright Moments will have me, I would like to continue presenting my artwork in this way. And yeah, so I've been a artist they've thankfully not gotten sick of me, and I've been an artist at every city since.
and I would imagine this has changed your life entirely. Do you ever think, as you were going through your art career years ago, that I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is probably paying the bills and this is what you're doing. And
Yeah,
did you
I
ever
mean,
think that
and
you would
it's
get to this point, like something like this?
no, no, never. You always dream of it. Oh, yeah, someday my art will be popular enough that maybe I can just support myself as an artist. But even now, even if that is true, I'm still working at Art Blocks full time. I've always had a day job, and then the art was in addition to the day job kind of thing. So I don't know, but yes, the trajectory of what's been happening over the last several years is just, yeah, it's really hard to understand the opportunities that have come up are just, I feel really blessed that
Yeah, well,
travel that I've been able to do and the people I've been able to meet and the exposure.
congratulations though, because the opportunity's there, but you have to be ready for it. And you obviously were ready for it and are ready for it. Jeff, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you for taking us back over your background and your history and how you got to here today. Why don't you let people know how they can find you if they'd like to find you online?
Yeah, first of all, yes, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the time and the space. Really, the best place to find me is probably Twitter. I'm at Jeff G. Davis on Twitter. That's where most of my Web3 dialogue occurs. But you could also find me on Art Blocks. Just search Jeff Davis in the search bar. I have quite a few projects there, so you can check that out.
All right. Excellent. Thanks again, Jeff, and good luck in Tokyo. I hope that goes well and is as exciting as all the other Bright Moments events, and love to talk to you again sometime in the future.
You bet. Thanks so much. Yeah, hope to see you again soon.